Welcome back to my channel, everyone. It's been a while due to some personal issues, but I'm back now. So like, subscribe and share and watch this entire video to be able to create this render. Thank you. Firstly, after opening up Blender, I took the default cube and scaled it to my desired measurements to create the interior walls. I then applied its scale by pressing Ctrl+A and then clicking on scale. After that, in edit mode, I separated one of his faces by selecting it and then right clicking and then clicking on separate. Once separated, I hit the object to look into the interior walls and started modeling. To model the basin, I clicked on Shift-A, then selected a cylinder and scaled it accordingly. Then applied the scale, again the same procedure, Ctrl+A, apply scale, and then applied bevel modifier, subsurf modifier, and then went into edit mode by pressing tab, and then selected the top face, clicked on I to inset, E to extrude, and I again to inset, and while holding down Ctrl to create the bend, whilst moving the mouse. I then clicked on smooth shading to give it a smooth finish. I also created a few loop cuts by pressing Ctrl+R in edit mode and to get the desired look. For the mirror and the handle, I used the spin tool in edit mode to create the bend. I downloaded the facade from Blender Kit and modified it slightly to fit my scene. To create the mirror, I used the circle by pressing Shift+A, then selecting circle and then selecting N-Gon from the left menu to fill it. I then selected top half of its vertices and moved it up by pressing on G and then Z or any axis you're working on. I then scaled it to fit the scene. In edit mode, I extruded the mirror, then insetted, then further extruded it to give it the look. Then applied bevel and subsurf modifier and smooth shading to give it a smooth finish. I then applied a different material to the mirror surface to separate it from its body and reposition the mirror as desired. To create the top half of the mirror support, I copied one of the faces as shown by Shift+D and then Z to move it along Z axis. Then I extruded it by pressing on E, further copying it and scaling it by pressing S and holding down Ctrl to scale a few units. After that, I downloaded the toilet fittings from Blender Kit and positioned it accordingly. To create the marble and wall and floor, I created a loop cut by pressing Ctrl+R and then applied a different material to it. I also downloaded the dough from Blender Kit. After that, I set up my camera by pressing Shift+A and then selecting camera from the drop down list and then positioning it accordingly just to set up my scene. I went on to create the false ceiling by duplicating its top face along Z axis and then extruding it to give it the thickness. I then placed a few lights in the scene and created a bulb holder using the extrude and inset options and then applied the bevel and subsurf modifiers to give it that finished look, give it a smooth finish, and then set up the scene accordingly. After that, I moved on to the materials part. For the lights, I used a black body node to be able to control the temperature. I used Cycle's render engine with adaptive sampling and the experimental one, and of course GPU compute and the default settings for the final render. And nothing complicated, no tweaking, nothing. It was just the default settings for the final render. I used Quixel Bridge for a few materials as shown. I used the 2K sized textures. Shockingly, it wasn't exporting to Blender 3.0, so I had to open up Blender 2.92 and export it there and then copy it in my scene. I then further copied the gold material from the facade to the handle by pressing Ctrl+L and linking the materials. I made use of the default principal BSDF for wall paint and the black paint. I then tweaked the lights a bit, downloaded the ceiling light, used Botanic for plants and pot, and that was it really. Now for the towel, I ran a few simulations using the handle as the collision object and the plane with lots of loop cuts with the subsurf modifier on and with self collision on to get the real cloth simulation out of it. I then applied the physics to it, then applied a solidify modifier and a subsurf modifier again to give it the finished look. I then used a fabric material from Quixel again and unwrapped it and applied it on the towel. Last but not least, do not forget to check the normals of your model. Make sure they're facing the right direction. Make sure it's the entire room that you're currently facing your camera into is completely blue and not the red part. So you check that from face orientation and correct it. If not, flip it by going into edit mode, selecting the entire object and then clicking on F3 and then searching there for flip, and you'll see the flip normals and click enter on that, and your model should be, the normals of your model should be flipped. I finally rendered my scene out, used my own denoising data to apply the denoiser and took it to Photoshop for a bit of fine tuning. In Photoshop I just pumped up the contrast a little bit, give it a little more exposure, give a bit of detailing as I rendered the entire thing at just I think 1000 or 1500 samples. So I think it needed more samples, but I used the denoiser to smooth out the entire render, which is why I went into Photoshop and gave it a bit of clarity in there. And that was it really. And this is your final render.